For a long time, I've made efforts to separate myself from the stereotypically far-left position of condemning voting. I've admitted that voting doesn't take long, it's fine to encourage somebody to vote who might not otherwise, and that generally there is a meaningful difference between the two major parties in the US and the UK. My skepticism around voting has come from the inclination of various leftists to put their full organizational weight behind liberal candidates like Biden or Stanmer, and end up being subsumed into these parties that hate us and our beliefs and leave our own goals unpursued. Ultimately, though, I'm still arguing for a position of balance rather than outright condemnation. That being said, I believe recent developments have left this analysis obsolete, and that radicalism must now take a much more ruthless position to keep up with the changing consciousness of the wider public. The ongoing genocide in Gaza has led to a noticeable shift in attitudes in liberals and leftists alike across the West. We've had to watch as our political leaders march lockstep with Israel's brazen attempts to displace Palestinian people with no outlet for resistance in conventional politics. And then with the elections in the US and the UK coming up this year, this is naturally leading people to question whether or not these genocide enablers even deserve our votes to begin with. And then from there, especially in the US, you've had the typical discourses of harm reduction and lesser evil voting spin up too. Today then, I want to make the case explicitly against voting as the strongest strategy that the left currently has available. Now, because my usual video production process apparently takes months or even years now, I'm slapping this together at a much lower production quality, just so I can get it out while it still has some relevance.
By the way, I have no interest in getting into the origins of the is he he's used the word genocide. Is genocide the right word? There are over probably roughly around 30,000 dead people in the Gaza Strip, talking around 1% of the population of Gaza dead. That number is increasing. We don't see an immediate end to the conflict soon. Maybe spring, maybe early summer, depending on what the Israeli government does, because it seems to be completely uncompromising and it doesn't seem really open to the Saudi plan whatsoever. So, I mean, I can agree that there are a certain amount of atrocities that are happening that the American government is not reacting to by being willing to leverage aid or shove the Netanyahu government as much as it should, at the very least. So I don't really feel like getting into the nuances of that, genocide, whether this term is accurate or not. Mostly because I think a bunch of other people have gotten into it, and it's not the main focus of the video, so I just don't feel like I need to address it. Let's concentrate on the voting aspect.
For anyone wondering, I am also working on a much longer, much fancier video on the side, but that's still a bit off from here. So I just realized my neck is purple because my floor LED is on, and it's too late to turn it off, so if you're wondering, I'm not diseased, that's just why. So the key observation of the current moment is that the rejection to vote is the most effective path towards radicalization. Due to being presented a choice between different genocide enablers, a shift in attitude against voting has taken place for many younger liberals and leftists alike, with the previously unthinkable of not voting for anybody being taken seriously. What's special about this is that not voting is a fundamentally illogical, nonsensical position, yet despite this, people are being drawn to it anyway. This is because, in a political landscape such as ours, we
at least agree on one point so far. Let's keep going.
In capitalist realism, where alternatives can scarcely be imagined, let alone be made feasible, resistance can often manifest as a desire to reject society altogether. In a sense, the only response to a world in which revolution or even reform feel hopelessly out of grasp is to simply declare, I cannot imagine a new future, but I don't need one to reject the present existence anyway. The urge not to vote is one such instance of a blind resistance. The desire to escape the perpetual dilemma of lesser evilism by rejecting its premise outright. This desire is, again, raw, it's base, it's unrefined, it's often ill thought out, but this is exactly what defines it as a complete rejection of existing society. Because in rejecting these systems, we also reject their rules, their internal logic, and their entire framework of what makes sense. While those who subscribe to the logic of existing superstructures, our political systems and the electoral process, will insist on how simple and obvious just voting is, that can't change the fact that the desire not to vote is a seed by which a radical desire to change society can grow. Once this rejection bursts to the surface, an incredibly effective path to radicalize these people is to take those base feelings and turn them into a cohesive political worldview. This plays on the same dynamic we saw in 2020 over abolishing the police. An at the time immediately intuitive idea that cleared the way to radical thinking, yet also made no sense within the framework of existing society. And today, this type of demand takes the form of something far simpler, of not having to support genocide. What threatens this budding radicalism is that it must immediately clash against the facts and logic of existing society, which demands that these alternatives are born fully formed and able to meet standards which they're trying to move past to begin with. If we don't vote for the Democrats...
I mean, look, I'm going to be honest, I'm waiting for like a cohesive point that I feel like I can tangle with, but it feels like the entire process is saying, yeah, this is stupid. Yeah, it makes no sense. Yeah, it's not organized. Yeah, you know, it's rejecting the current status quo, but you know, that's good. And I mean, you know what, it rejects the material conditions of what's going on right now, but you know, this feeling, it's an opportunity for radicalism. So to me, right, for somebody who cares about the here and now, for the people who live around me, for somebody who cares about my family, and for many other people who care about their family, and for many other people who care about the state of the world, you cannot make a decision of what to do here politically isolated in a bubble of rage, no matter how justified it is, just rejecting the conditions of the world, hoping that, you know, the spirit of radical Leninist, Marxist, communist, Mao, whatever version of Leninism, Marxism, communist, social, whatever it is, all of them together in the most broad strokes coalition, assuming that that will rise you up. And so you're willing to take the political risk of another Trump term. Somebody who explicitly said he wanted to suspend the Constitution. Somebody who explicitly tried to overturn the result of a democratic election, somebody who's explicitly said he wants to install loyalists and cronies in every position of power imaginable, and somebody who's openly flirting with authoritarianism, aligning himself with people like Viktor Orban, aligning himself with people in some manners, and in some senses, with Vladimir Putin. But Viktor Orban, very openly. Somebody who's centralized the press around himself. Someone who's gouged on the state, somebody who's had his cronies gouge on the state, who's covered up for his friends, and is trying to centralize institutions around himself. Something that's probably very, well, I guess gets Donald Trump like up and going. And so if we were just to say we don't like Joe Biden's policy on Israel, which I knew I didn't like Joe Biden's general policy on Israel when I voted for him in 2020. I didn't expect Joe Biden to be a progressive on Israel. I expected Joe Biden to be better than the alternative and to work on some of the issues that I care about, not work on other issues that I care about, and in some instances actually be going possibly even in the other direction than what I would want us to go. But in comparison to the other option, he generally moves us further in the right direction. And so if I have to look at two roads, knowing that those are our only two options, is the hope that just like the spirit of this already not, what we're acknowledging is not well defined, what is not well organized, what is not an already pre-construct movement, but one that will, I guess, assumedly develop along the way of not voting. It's just, it's playing roulette with the country. And I have no interest in playing roulette with the country. It's not being strategic with the political influence and the political power you have. You can make noise as people with the non-committed vote by people who voted, made noise. Actually, this is the greatest point. If a bunch of people went out and didn't vote, and then the reason they gave was Gaza, does that make a bigger statement than the non-committed vote that we're getting now in the primary that actually got its way into the TV cycle with Nina Turner on segment on TV talking about what's going on in Gaza? This is a way of people using voting as a mechanism to try to drag more attention to what's going on in Gaza and slightly push the president to be more assertive in his rhetoric, talking about, hey, you know what? Actually, we're going to make a port in Gaza. Did he go far enough? No. Did he go farther than what he might have gone? If it wasn't for that public pressure from people like, damn, we need those 100,000 votes in the swing state. Okay, fine, come over. But that was because those people showed they were willing to go out to the polls and vote, not because they showed that they stayed home. The president has no way to know if somebody stayed home because they were lazy or stayed home because they cared about Palestine. And I mean, it's the same thing with non-committed, but hey, that's what's smart about being non-committed. When you come out, you show that you're politically involved, so you can't say that you were lazy. So that's the reason you didn't come out. And people are assuming that it's all voting for, you know, Palestine. That's why everybody's voting non-committed, but that's not necessarily true. A lot of people are voting non-committed for other reasons. But because the narrative around the vote for non-committed was, oh, it's for Palestine, you can just claim all of those votes, therefore making your voice louder, getting more votes than you necessarily than you actually had, by just making the specter around non-committed being around Palestine, therefore making your voice louder, therefore adding to your pressure campaign. But the only way you could add to that pressure campaign was by going out and voting and showing that you were politically involved in that way. Because that's what a lot of these politicians react to, because that's one of the most direct levers of power the American people have in controlling who gets the job.
How will we beat the Republicans? If we don't have the police, how will we prevent crime? It's the job of superstructures like the media and the political system to forcibly drag these intuitive desires down into the mud of policy and electoral pragmatism, where they lose any radical potential. This was the fate of abolishing the police the moment it became defund the police, which, ironically enough, in trading in its radical content to be more appealing to conventional politics, did a far worse job at grasping anybody as a position than abolition ever did. Voting is especially vulnerable to this.
By the way, both abolish and defund the police were both horribly unpopular slogans with the general American public. So if somebody was trying to change abolish the police to defund the police for like reform reasons, or like to make it acceptable to more people, it doesn't even make sense. Because like the reason people didn't like abolish the police is because people hear that and they say, okay, there's lawlessness. You would just want like rapists to run around and rape everybody. What's wrong with you? But if you say defund the police, then, I mean, instead of getting that reaction, it's like, okay, so you just want to make it harder for the police to like deal with the people around us. Like these slogans did not really communicate very well to people. What the intention was, if it was to abolish the police but change them with something that's basically the police but is going to be institutionally different than the police, even though, I mean, we refer I mean, culturally it's basically still policey, but I mean, they're just going to institutionally do it different so it doesn't have the same biases against people, and so that the power of the state, like, it's neither were particularly great slogans, at least when it comes to convincing people. When it comes to whatever signal you're trying to send to your base, okay, maybe, but it just wasn't popular either way.
Because its radical content consists of simply not engaging with a system at all, with no immediately obvious alternate mode of activity. Of course, in reality, no longer allowing ourselves to be tied up in the spectacle of electoral politics frees us up to do all sorts of things, but this won't be immediately obvious to most people who begin to question the basis of voting, and they'll be continually beat over the head with the idea that it just takes a day to vote. We can postulate about various forms of direct action, mutual aid, and activism in general.
Can I just also put out there, I don't know if we're going to get into the direct impact of voting, because right now it seems that their position is, you know, this irrespective of any of the material harm or impact on the here and now. And I would also make the case that it's probably going to be easier to make a political movement that has influence, power, and effect on the world, and to like build it up in the public's face if we participate in electoral politics and get people like AOC and others in positions of power where they can be loud and they could be, you know, able to, you know, get out there and spread their message to more people and have some legislative impact, have some bargaining impact, so they can show, hey, this is what we're willing to do for you. This is what we can do for you. You got to start giving deliverables to people to be like, wow, AOC did that bill that we all liked. It looks like that her ideology or ideas are actually not that bad, but those are going to take that's going to take some level of electoral participation. But when it comes to material harm in Gaza, if Donald Trump is president, Donald Trump said on the campaign trail, you got to kill the families of terrorists, because by killing the families of terrorists, you will then hurt the terrorists, and then you will make them stop by basically destroying their morale. Just annihilate them, exterminate them. That's his open position. You put that man in that position of power at the start of October 7th, or after November, say this war is somehow still going on, hopefully forbid that. Oh, Jesus. But if it is, do you think his position is going to be, oh, we'll just keep flying as is? That's best case scenario, as he says, okay, we're flying as is, and it was all just bolster and bullshit. We know where his base comes from. We know that his ambassador wants a one-state solution that has the Israeli military permanently occupying the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. That's their open position. And they need to destroy whatever it takes to destroy Hamas to do that. But they're not going to build the foundation for peace. It's just going to become one wave of violence before the next wave of violence after, Gazans are shown, hey, the Israelis still don't want to give us any sovereignty. So yeah, it will get materially worse, I think, if Trump's in office.